Hi everybody, I want to talk to you about creating accessible color schemes for Canvas pages. Now Canvas by default, it's a very accessible platform, meaning that it's accessible for students with accommodations or learning disabilities, and that's a great thing. But as a consequence, a lot of times our content might appear to be a little bit bland. And so today I want to talk about how we can dress up the content, how we can pick colors that really work for our pages and our courses, how we can add embellishments and increase the aesthetic appeal of our courses while still maintaining that accessibility. So I'm going to start by showing one example of an accessible color scheme for a page that I have. And so I start with a banner, and then based on the color scheme from this picture in the banner, I have different elements on the page. So I'll have section dividers, I have iconology, I have other elements such as these divs. And I'm going to walk you through how I picked these colors, how you might pick similar colors that might complement the primary colors that you want to use on your pages. So let me start by saying a word about imagery. Imagery is great. We always want to supplement the content in our courses with visual icons and imagery. So my question for you is, I have 3 images here on this page. I have a crystal brain, I have an image of a laptop computer, and then I have an illustration representing space. Now I want you to ask, what do these 3 things have in common? It might be actually kind of hard to come up with some kind of narrative for these images. But with a little bit of trickery, you can actually pull some narrative. You can pull some continuity and combine these pictures into something that seems a little bit more seamless. And here's an example of how you could do that. So in this case, I used PowerPoint. You can use any photo editing software. You can use Photoshop or GIMP or even your phone or tablet. In this case, I came up with some shapes. I really like those hexagon shapes because they can really work well with each other. I could have 6 and they could be a banner, or I could have 1, 2, or 3, and they have some kind of continuity in that they're the same color, and I pull the images into the shapes. For that crystal brain, I just deleted the background part of it. You can do that either in Photoshop, or you can even do it in PowerPoint or any image editing software. And then I applied tints to all of these things. So I changed them so that they're roughly the same tint embedded within the same shapes. And that way there's some continuity. It kind of helps me to tell a story and pull all of these elements together. So let's talk about the colors that we use on our pages, whether it's in our imagery or other elements that we have on our Canvas page. So the first thing I want to do is determine my color scheme. And to do that, I'm going to pick 1 or 2 colors. And if you even pick just 1 color, then automatically you have 5 options to choose from. You'll have the color, you'll have the tint and shade of the color, and then you can incorporate black and white. So if I refer to these images again, you can tell that I have this color, and the color plus white and black give me a tint and a shade of that color. So just by choosing 1 color, I have 5 options to choose from for elements on my page. And furthermore, if I integrate gray into the mix, then I'll have a tint, a tone, and a shade. So just with 1 color, I have 7 different elements to choose from. And if I pick 2 colors, then that increases the color, the tint, the tone, and it adds 1 more shade. So that would be 11 things to choose from. And you can see the influence of this color on these images. So the background image, the background shapes here are the color. And then I use the tint. I use this tint to color in the background of the screen on the computer, as well as the background of this illustration right here. And then you can see various tones and shades throughout the images, as well as white, gray, and black. Now I'm going to talk through some really fun resources that we have online for picking color schemes, modifying color schemes. But before we get into that, I'm going to share with you my 2 contrast BFFs, my best friends forever. And one is a tool called the Instant Eyedropper. And this is a tool that I installed on my computer. There are Chrome extensions and there are other programs that are kind of like it. This one's called Instant Eyedropper, but it allows me to sample any color that I have on my screen, whether it's from an image or a program. I can get the hex color code for that color, which is a hex color code is an alphanumeric. It's 6 characters long, and it tells that unique identifier for that color. My other contrast BFF is a website called WebAIM. They have this contrast checker. If you just do a quick Google search and you type in contrast checker or accessibility contrast checker, this will probably be at the very top of the list. And this way you can add in foreground or background colors and you can determine the contrast ratio. And ideally, if you have colorful text, then you want to make sure that those colors are at least a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 in order for it to have enough contrast. Now, a contrast ratio of 1 to 1 would be something like white text on top of a white background or blue text on a blue background. There is no contrast, and so you can't see the words. It's not possible. A contrast ratio of 21 to 1 would be like black text on a white background. Now let's go ahead and look at some of these websites. I'll have the links to these websites in the description below, but we're going to look at Coolors.co, Color-hex, and Color.adobe.com. Now this blue that you see on the screen is this exact same blue that I used for those previous images, and so I'm going to grab that hex color and we're going to go to these websites and see if we can have a little bit of fun. So the first website is called Coolors.co, and you can go ahead and start the generator and it's going to randomly generate a color scheme for you. This is a very fun tool. You can remove colors, you can move the colors around. If I really like a couple of colors, then I can lock them into place, and then you can hit spacebar and generate more color schemes until you find stuff that you like, and then I can be locking these down until I find something that I like. And if you hit something that's in the neighborhood of what you like, then you can see different shades of that. So I can darken this up maybe, and then I can copy the hex code. So each of these have hex codes at the bottom here, as well as the HTML names for the colors. And I can drag and drop and move these around. I can lock and unlock them, and then when I hit spacebar, then I get new color schemes. So you can see what works and then grab those hex colors and you can integrate those into Canvas. And another interesting tool is you can create a palette from a photo. And so I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop a photo on here, and then you have options. There's several different pictures on the screen here, and so I can just move this around until I see something that I like. And I can move this to different places, and I can move these around, maybe sort them. And all of these colors are based on colors that are found inside that photo. So it's a great way to upload a picture, and then you can get the color scheme based on that picture and integrate those colors into your Canvas course. And if I get a scheme that I like, maybe I'll do a little bit more modification here. And then I can click next and I can open it in the generator, which is this background thing. I can view it in a palette, I can export it, save it, I can create a collage. So if I were to create a collage, then I get the picture, I can change the aspect ratio so that it better fits, and then I can export that. And there I have my picture and I have my hex colors. Now another interesting feature about this platform is I can get a color scheme and then I can determine what the color scheme looks like in terms of color blindness. So students that have color blindness. And there are different forms of color blindness. Some people have a hard time distinguishing between reds and greens. Others have a hard time distinguishing between maybe blues and reds. And a very select few might see things in a grayscale. And so in this case, I can go ahead and I can click through and see how this color scheme might be perceived by different people with different forms of color blindness. And so that's something that you'll definitely want to take in consideration. There are other features that you can play around with, but I'm going to hop over here to this website called Color-hex. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in that blue code. So the blue code is hashtag 2683C6. And that's the hex code, but it also gives me the RGB values, which are the red, green, and blue. And obviously this blue color is going to have a lot more blue than it will red. And it gives me a lot of other values that to me, they don't really mean all that much. But an interesting thing is I was talking about shades and tints before. And so here's my color. And to the right here is black. And then I have the various iterations between my color and black. And the same thing for the tints. I have my color, I have white, and then I have various iterations of tints between my color and white. Down below, I can see my triadic colors, and I'll talk about that more in a second. And I can also see my complementary color, which is, if you remember the color wheel, the complementary color is on the polar opposite side of the color wheel. And then I can have monochromatic values. So my color is right in the middle here, and then I can see darker shades and lighter tints. Down here, I can see some previews of what my text would look like if it had the color on a black background or a white background, as well as some CSS coding and related colors down there. So to me, this is all valuable information. Now I'm going to head over to color.adobe.com, and this is also a great website. I'm going to put my color right in the middle there, and I can see my color, and then I can see other variations of my color as well. But then I can apply different harmony rules. So I can see my monochromatic color, I can see my triad, which if you remember, they said the triad on the other website as well. So my triad for this blue would be a red and a green, which is essentially it takes my color, the value from the color wheel, it goes to the center, and then it splits out 33% on each angle right here. So it's kind of like a Mercedes-Benz symbol. and those are my triadic colors based on this initial color that I chose. I can see my complementary color as well. That's the one that's right across the way. So in this case, column C is my original color, and column E would be my complementary color. They also have things like split complementaries and double split complementaries, a lot of different schemes that you can choose from. If I head over here to extract theme, then I can upload that banner, the image that I had before, and then I can see, again, it's using my picture to create a color scheme for me. And this is different than the other website color scheme, but I can choose different values. So I have muted, I have deep color scheme, a dark color scheme, and I can take any one of these values and I can modify that if I wanted to. Suppose this dark one's a little bit dark and I want to lighten it up a little bit. And this gray one, I want to give that a little bit more color as well. Then I can play around with that, and then I would be able to download that or save the color scheme. I could name it. And of course I have the hex codes right down here, so I can grab those values very easily. Another interesting feature when I've uploaded my picture is that I can extract a gradient based on colors from this picture. And so that's a lot of fun as well. Now let me show an application of what you could do with these colors possibly. If you get a color scheme from one of these websites, you can go into Canvas, and first thing you can do is create a tabbed interaction using these colors. And so if I bounce around from tab to tab, you can see that, yeah, there's various colors, and those seem to be a pretty respectable color scheme. The only thing I'm eyeballing it right now is that I would want to point out, we're talking about accessible color schemes. Most of these seems very accessible, except for this middle one. I'm going to suspect that there's not enough contrast between the background and this white text. And so I probably want to make this dark text, such as the Contact Me tab or the Bonus tab. But in order to check that, I would first want to grab that color, and then I'll head over to my BFF, the contrast checker, and I'll paste in that code right there. And so in this case, the background color is this fuchsia, and the foreground color is white, and I can see that that's just not enough contrast. And so what I can do is try and lighten up the text a little bit. So if I get it to a dark text like this, then that would be adequate contrast. Or if I really wanted to keep that white text on the background, I would just need to darken up the background. And so I'd find something that is above 4.5. And so either one of those options would work. All right, so let's go back to our Canvas page and let's see how we can get to this point. So I have this image, and this is a banner that I uploaded. And so these elements have color schemes that are all complementary to each other. And I grabbed these color schemes directly from the picture. And so I just grabbed some different colors that are on the picture, and then I used those colors to inform me for what kind of colors I would use later on in the page. Now I want to teach you about a couple of different elements that you can introduce to your Canvas page. And one is this div element, and I'll have this information, all of this code on the website, howtocanvas.com. So just click the link below in the description, and then you can go visit the supplementary blog posts for this video. So one is a div, and the div has a background color, and then it has a text color, and it has some other elements that I'll talk you through. And the other is an HR. And HR is a horizontal rule. And if you just type in HR inside those angle brackets in the HTML editor, it'll create a horizontal rule, which is a 1 pixel line that spans the width of the page. And so it's just 1 pixel and it's black. But what I did is I made that a different color. So I put a 1 pixel border and I made it solid, and I had the background a color, and then the border is a color, and then the height is 10 pixels. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. But first I want to elaborate on where I got these colors, the background colors. So use my eyedropper tool, and I'll just grab some colors from the picture that I used. And that hex color would be the background color that I have for my div, or for the text, or for the border of my horizontal rule. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the page. How did I do that? How did I incorporate those two elements onto the page? And to do that, I'm going to hop over to the HTML editor. And here I can see my horizontal rule, and then I styled it. So this is inline CSS. And I determined that there's a background color, and the background color I got from a sampling of that picture. And that horizontal rule, by default, it's 1 pixel, and I want it to be 10 pixels tall, so a bit thicker. And I want it to be the width of 100%, which you don't have to put because by default it will be 100% unless you specify it for something different, such as 50%. So I'll go ahead and save the page as 50%, and we'll take a look at that. And then the horizontal rule, I could just have it as that, a color and a height and whatever percent width you want. but I also want there to be a border around the horizontal rule, and that's going to be a 1 pixel border, a solid line, and then this is the color. And I have a few different horizontal rules throughout the page. Let's go ahead and save that. And now you can see the difference between this horizontal rule that I created that's 50% versus this one that's 100%. And if I zoom in a bit, then you can see the color of the background. You can see there's a 1 pixel border that's a different color. It's 50% of the width, meaning it doesn't matter the width of the page. If I were to make this a wider page, then you can see it still takes up 50%. If I were to expand some of these elements, and then you can see it's a different width, but it's still 50% of that window. Now the div elements are what I have done here. So here's one div. It's just a did you know box, kind of a pop-up box that I have floating around with my content. And I have another one down here. And so of course this page is just boilerplate, but you can put whatever content you want in these boxes. And the elements I'll point out is that there's a background color, there's a text color, and then I have a little bit of roundness, so it's not just a square box. And then I have some padding. So you notice that the words don't go right out to the edge of the element. It kind of has a little bit of padding. So let's take a look at how I did this box. So I'm going to grab my code and we're going to look for that div element. So here's the one div. I have a div. A div is nothing unless you put content inside of it. So if you just had a blank div, it wouldn't really be anything, but I have some content in there. I have a header 3 and then I have a paragraph inside my div. And so this right here is the div that we're looking at. Now I have a border. I put some classes, and the class is border TRBL, so top right, bottom left, and then border round. So that gives it the round corners. And these are just the classes that I always happen to use on divs like this. Now the style is, that's the inline CSS, and so I have it floating to the right, which means there's going to be text on the page, and I want this to be on the right side of the page, and I want it to float to the right, so the text would come up right up against it. I have a max width. I don't want it to be any larger than 400 pixels, but if it's a small screen, then I want it to be 30% of the width. And then I have my background color, and then I have a padding of 10 pixels, so that way the words don't go right up to the edge. And I have all of the text centered, and the text is this color. And then I have the font size as large. I have the margin to the left and margin to the bottom as 15 pixels. So that way these words that are the paragraph words on the screen don't go right up against the div, right up against my box. So the words on the inside have a little bit of padding, and then the words on the outside are separated by some margin. And then I just put my word elements. So the div will be as big as my text that I have in there. If I were to have a paragraph of text, it would form the shape of that paragraph. So let's take one more look at this. First, I'm going to go ahead and copy that background color, and I'm going to copy the font color because I want to make sure that those are accessible. So I'll go ahead and save that. So we'll look one more time at the elements. So I have some margin around it. That way these words don't go right up against the edge. There's a little bit of space on the left and on the bottom. And then there's some padding, so a little bit of space between the edge of the div and the text that's inside the div. I have the inside color, I have the text color, I have everything centered, I determined the font sizes. Now I'm going to go to edit this page one more time. This time we're going to run the accessibility checker because I'm suspicious that this isn't going to be an accessible contrast. So when I run it, then sure enough, the first thing I noticed is that it has an issue with this div. The background color and the foreground color simply do not have enough contrast. And I can change the text color so that it's light, or I can change it so it's darker. The Canvas accessibility checker doesn't let me change the background color, and that's kind of what I want to do. I want to keep the text whatever color that is, but I want to change the background color. So I'm going to hop over here to my accessibility checker, and I copied those values of the foreground and the background color. And I can see that sure enough, the contrast ratio is 2.15 to 1. Canvas didn't tell me that. They just said it's not accessible enough. It's not enough contrast. And so I'm going to take this box, the background, and I'm going to darken it up until I get to that 4.5. So it looks like this is the color that the box is going to have to be if I want the foreground color, which is the text, to be this color. Now, if I lightened it up so that the text is white, then I can probably lighten up the background as well. But I'm just going to keep this as it is. So let's hop over to the edit window, and I'm going to hop into where the div is, and we're going to change the background color. which is right here, and we're going to darken that up a bit. So that's the new background color, and I have another div later on the screen, and I'm going to change that background color as well. And also, before we save, I'm just going to go back up to that first horizontal rule, and I'm going to change that width to 100%. I can just delete it because by default it's going to be 100%. And so here we go. Here are my new elements, and you can notice that this is noticeably darker. And again, I could lighten up this box a little bit if I wanted the font to be perfectly white, but I thought that this would be fun. And so last thing I'm going to do is look at the iconology. So I have these images right here, and you notice that the images are a good match to the picture as well. So let's look at how I did those. So I pulled up the images. There are a lot of repositories online where you can find free or cheap icons. And what I did is I just went into PowerPoint and I used the default Microsoft repository. If you have access to Office 365, if your institution has a subscription, or if you have your own personal paid account, then you have access to illustrations just like these. And so let's go behind the scenes and take a look at these. So each of these is an image, and how I got those is I went to Insert and Pictures, and then I just look at their stock photography library, and I'm interested in the illustrations that they have. And you can search for something like school and find some elements that you like. So maybe I'll click on the text boxes and the puzzle, and maybe even something a little more complicated like this book stack, and I'll insert those images. So by default, I have this color scheme so that it's set to that picture that we were working on, but you can change your colors by default right in PowerPoint. And so as I hover over, you can see that it all kinds of changes. So this might also be a good color scheme. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a trick here. I'll copy this image, and I'm going to paste the image down here, and then I'll make some copies of these illustrations. I'm just going to hold Control on the keyboard, and then I'll go to Format the Graphics, and for fill, I'm going to use the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to select something from this picture. So perhaps a sky color. And then you can see that if I had this picture on the Canvas page, then I can easily make these icons, the illustrations, complement the color scheme on the image here. It's so easy. I'll just go ahead, let me select these again, go up to Graphics, Format ribbon, and the eyedropper tool. This time let's make it maybe a dark one of these other colors, or even grab something from the sky. So there's so many options, and what you'd want to do is make sure this is cropped down. I went in and cropped this because by default there's a lot of space between the outside of the icon and the border of the actual picture. So I went and cropped it so that the image is nice and small like this without too much space around the outside. And then you go ahead and save it. So I'm going to save as a picture, and you name it whatever you want, but make sure that you save it not as a scalable vector graphic, not as an SVG file, but you'll want it probably as a PNG, which is a portable network graphic, or maybe a JPEG. But the difference is if there's any transparent background, when you save it as a JPEG, it's going to convert that transparent background into white. And let me show you the difference. I'm going to save that JPEG that I just now created, and if I put it over this background image, you can see that there's a lot of white in the background. As opposed to this one, this is an SVG, but if I had saved this as a PNG, then I get that transparency effect. And in Canvas, I'll tell you that it probably doesn't matter most of the time, unless you have a colored background, such as the div that I was showing you. If I were to put this PNG inside the div, then it would look really nice. If I put this one inside the div, it would look really bad because of this white. It fills in all of the gaps with white, and I just want it to be nothing. And I just want it to be transparent. And so that's why I always save these as PNGs. Now back in our Canvas page, all I do is upload these icons onto the Canvas page. I put in a little bit of coding. You notice that these words don't go right up against the image, and that's intentional too. So let me show you how I do that. I'm going to go into the edit, and we're going to hop over to the HTML editor, and let me duplicate that entire paragraph. Okay, now I have two paragraphs. I'm going to take out all of this styling that I have, and I'm just going to keep the image. All right, so now I have two sections that are replicated. One has an image, and then the source would be the place where I uploaded the image onto Canvas. I want it to be about 100. I want it to be 100 pixels wide, 120 pixels tall, and I'll keep that for both of the images. Now this second image that I have down here has some CSS. And the CSS that I have is I want it to float to the left, meaning it's not going to take an entire line of code on the page. Instead, it's going to float to the left, and there will be other lines that can render. And I'll show you what that looks like. And then I have some margin to the right, so I don't want the words to go right up against my image. And I also put in a little bit of padding at the bottom. And those are the only changes that I made, were these 3 things of CSS code. And it makes a big difference. So I'm going to go ahead and save the page, and we'll take a look at it. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. The first one isn't floating. So when it's not floating, that means it takes up an entire line of text. So you can see this picture and the words are all part of that same line. And then the second line goes right beneath it. And the second one here, since it's floating to the left, all of these lines go more seamlessly. And then you can see there's also a little bit of a gap right there. So let's go back to the edit. Now let's put in that style, this inline CSS, and we're going to float it to the left. I'm not going to put the margins quite yet. We're just going to save it like that. Okay, now you can see that it looks a little bit better. So the words form various lines, and it's not just one line. But then you can see that the words also go right up against my image, and that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I just want a little bit of spacing. And that's where putting a margin to the right of just 15 pixels is sufficient. And then I have 10 pixels at the bottom, which doesn't really do anything in this case, but sometimes it might be set up so that the line of text runs pretty close underneath. And so I just want a little bit of space to the right, a little bit of space to the bottom. You'll notice for my other elements, I put a little bit of space to the left and a little bit of space to the bottom because I have this floating to the right as opposed to this one floating to the left. And so as an overview, today we looked at imagery, how to create continuity with your imagery, as well as how to pick color schemes, including analyzing colors, tints, tones, shades with various grayscales. I showed you 2 of my BFFs, which are the Instant Eyedropper tool and the WebAIM Contrast Checker. We looked at the websites coolors.co, color-hex.com, and color.adobe.com. And I showed you various elements and illustrations and how to modify those to your color scheme to create continuity on your page and really bump up the aesthetic appeal of your Canvas courses. Let me know if you have questions or comments. If you want the code that I was using on this page, then go to howtocanvas.com. There's a link in the description below. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and please like this video. Let me know if you want more content like this in the future.
Happy teaching and learning.